Hello and welcome to the EFN Presents review for Season 4, Episode 15, Twilight Time. Joining me today we have IndexPony.
Hello.
And from KPNY, Kiniro.
Why, hello there.
Well, this is writer Dave Polsky's third episode in Season 4, the first two being Daring Don't and Rarity Takes Manhattan. And it's also his first Cutie Crusaders episode ever. And now the CMC, being a lot younger than the main six, faced some very different situations. How well do you think he handled writing for the CMC, and do you think he managed to capture the characters' personalities? Index?
His portrayal was actually rather entertaining in my eyes. I was not disappointed whatsoever. I think a good comparison scene as the way they've been portrayed in past seasons, more along the lines of, actively searching for their cutie marks. In today's episode, it was completely different because instead of searching for them, for the most part, they were more along the lines of learning lessons on actual skills that Twilight was teaching them, which I don't think that's something we've seen before.
Yeah, in previous seasons, they were a lot more manic in their attempts to get a cutie mark. A lot of their adventures were ill-advised, and they're oddly focused in this episode, and I don't know whether that's just the way that Dave Polsky decided to write the characters, or whether it's actually an attempt by the show to show the CMC growing up and maturing. Kiniro, what do you think?
Like Index had said, it's a matter of the Cutie Mark Crusaders seemingly like they're growing up a little bit. They're not too concerned with getting their cutie marks. Obviously, it still has quite a bit to do with their MO, but now they're being more lax with it. They're kind of more concerned just learning skills that's applicable to them, necessarily, compared to just trying to find their special talent. Because, as we've seen before, that, ponies can have multiple different skills, but doesn't necessarily mean it's their talent, or their special talent for that matter. So I really did enjoy that. I haven't seen that in the past before, just more of a, hey, let's go on this wild and crazy adventure to try to get our cutie marks, guys! Let's do it! And now it's well, hey, let's take a step back and try to figure out what we can really do.
Well, they don't even mention cutie marks in this episode, do they? They're certainly not searching for their cutie marks. It's Twilight Time.
They're actually trying to apply their time to try to gain something from someone who has a vast amount of knowledge, which, Twilight seems to be a plethora of, considering she lives in a library. She's smart, she's talented, of course, she's the princess of magic, so why not? Learn from the best.
I think the other interesting thing that they played to in this episode was finally acknowledging for once how serious a deal Twilight being in Ponyville should be, since she is a princess now. Because in this season thus far, it just portrays her as, just another face in the crowd. And finally, for once, we're starting to see people getting excited and going, oh my gosh, I've seen her around town, I haven't paid attention to her before. And they're finally starting to pay more attention to it now. It's not a very big thing, but it is kind of an interesting twist on things.
Twilight being a princess is one of those things that so many people were just afraid was going to ruin the show. But then people were getting upset that Twilight wasn't being treated like a princess all the time. Now Twilight being treated like a princess would ruin the show because it would break a lot of the character dynamics that they built up over the seasons. Now they can't go back on Twilight being made a princess, so they do have to walk that fine line on how characters treat her, but they're also the ones that get to decide what it means for Twilight to be called a princess. And I really think that they're out to defy a lot of expectations that viewers may have regarding that title.
I kind of have to add on to that, too. Throughout the entire episode, you see all of the fillies and colts are like, they're super excited. Oh my god, we have royalty. We have a famous pony in town. And they get super excited up to the point of being paparazzi. But yet, to the adults that are seen in the background, whether it's Minuet or Berry Punch being in the background, or Cherry Berry, or any of the other background ponies that are there, they don't really seem to pay attention or pay no mind to the fact that Princess Twilight's there. Maybe they know that, she's just an ordinary pony. She's royalty by ascension, so to speak, so she's no different than any other resident there, or maybe it just doesn't affect them.
I think the big thing that really plays into it, though, in their way that they see her, is how humble she is, and how she doesn't really see herself as a big deal. You saw how she handled all the little fillies and everything. She didn't really pay much attention to it. She was more shocked that people even wanted her autograph in the first place.
I don't know whether it was the intention in this episode for the adults to be treating Twilight differently, because they're all really just background characters in this episode. They're there to fill out the scene and make it look like the town is actually populated. But there certainly seems to be that separation between how the kids in this episode were treating Twilight and that paparazzi element, and how the adults in this season have been treating Twilight. Like you'd mentioned in Rarity Takes Manhattan, she can't even get a cab. But we can't even just say this is what they're doing with her character now, because this is a problem that existed in the show well before Twilight became a princess. Twilight was never a regular person in the show. She was always, oh, Twilight Sparkle, the person that battled Nightmare Moon, and oh, Twilight Sparkle, the person that defeated Discord. She did a lot of notable things that people should recognize her for. So to say, oh, people are treating her the wrong way because she's a princess, is ignoring the fact that that's the way it's always been for her character in this show.
Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like, for comedic sake, she could be the princess of the people, and we can just insert the Soviet anthem somewhere in here for that.
Well, she certainly eats like the princess of the people now, doesn't she?
Yeah, considering she's eating how many hamburgers in one go.
Considering she wiped her face with a hamburger.
I'm actually surprised there hasn't been more discussion on those hamburgers, and are they even called hamburgers? Is it hayburgers? What's the proper nomenclature? And one of the ponies has a hamburger cutie mark, and what's that supposed to mean? And it's silly and has no bearing on the episode, and I thought people loved that kind of stuff.
I did really appreciate, there was quite a bit of a throwback reference in that, where, Twilight Sparkle is obviously just overly enjoying hamburgers and hay fries and the little horseshoe crispy thingies. Very reminiscent of how in the past there was a nice little article written in the Full Free Press, I believe, of Princess Celestia overeating slices of cake.
Again, I don't know if that was intended, but it does fit with the dichotomy of how the children see Twilight versus who she really is. The kids are obsessed and can only see her as a princess, and there she is just stuffing her face with hamburgers. Not exactly what one would call regal.
No, not at all. And I think her character shows very well that she's still very humbling, even though she is considering a princess. And that's the nice thing too, is she still acts very much like her former self, but and doesn't really pay it no mind that she is a princess.
But I think this goes to show that the kids really are in their own world, how they see things and what they think is important. They think Twilight is important because she's a princess, not because of what she's offering them. And she does offer them the same thing she offered the CMC, the ability to learn from her, which is something tangible. It goes beyond just associating with a princess, but they find no value in that. And yes, Twilight is very generous with her time in this episode, even when the entire school shows up to Twilight Time. She's on the ball, she's organizing who is going to do what, and willing to help them learn. It just seems that she was really intended to contrast with how the CMC and the other kids were acting, where she's very understanding and generous and giving with her time, whereas the kids are only doing things to get something in return, not because they truly want to help or do something for another individual. That starts with the CMC, Diamond Tiara, Silver Spoon, and eventually the entire class. You could say it has to do with the friendship that Twilight has with the CMC, but she's willing to help the entire class. She's not friends with the entire class. So I think this really goes beyond a lesson in doing something nice for your friends. What do you guys think?
I do have to agree that she does show her generosity and her humbleness by sharing the Cutie Mark Crusaders Twilight Time with the rest of the CMC's class. And in most cases, the average person would take offense by what the CMCs did by dragging the rest of the class along. But instead, Twilight didn't really get upset by that. And instead, she cherishes the thought of imparting her knowledge, and which, if you ask me, that's generous of itself, so.
It's as I said earlier, she's very humble.
But was she, I guess, excessively humble in this episode? Because we've seen Twilight get frustrated or upset even at little things in the past. She has a nervous breakdown over a late assignment. Now granted, she's dealing with the Cutie Mark Crusaders, but she barely registers disappointment with them, despite what they do. And is that potentially out of character for Twilight to fulfill the role she needed to play in this episode?
I don't necessarily think that's the case. Seeing as, have you noticed, ever since she became princess, she's been trying to learn different mannerisms and how royalty is supposed to act. I guess her humbleness would be more along the lines of showing that she's learning how to deal with her situations a lot more calmly and more mannerly.
So you think this is part of a larger trend of Twilight's character maturing?
I wouldn't say the episode portrays growth so much as it portrays a lesson that she has learned, or that showing how she is applying different things that she's been studying over time.
Like that box.
Yeah, like the box that you see the picture of in the background, where she's got the whole model of it down. She's been studying it and everything.
That's another great example of the continuity of this season-spanning arc, the plotline of the box and the keys. And thank goodness, because even if it's just something in the background, the characters haven't forgotten about it. It's there. There's stories about it. There's more that could be told. And the characters aren't just going to stumble onto the answer. Twilight's putting work into it, just like she's expecting the Cutie Crusaders to put into their studies. And I can't say whether this is intentional, but that poster really contrasts to the episodes of It's About Time and Feeling Pinky Keen, where Twilight had messy printouts and an entire library riddled with charts and notes and books. And the poster here is almost a blueprint. It's very exacting. It's very meticulously crafted. And I don't know whether that's indicative of, again, Twilight's character just growing up and maturing and attacking these problems in a more calm manner, but it definitely fits with that conclusion.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. This hasn't been done in any season before until now. There's a lot of stuff in the background elements and stuff like that. It's helping to continue this process towards the end of the season when we're supposed to find out what's in the box. Supposedly.
And in this case, for this season, as we've seen thus far, like I said, there is a much greater level of continuity, not just over the season, but between episodes. But as far as over the season, yeah, we've seen the introduction of the box from the Tree of Harmony. And even if it's little subtle references in the background, obviously with the schematics of the box in the background, what we think are the keys for the box, things like that keep the story and the narrative going, of keeping the viewers engaged with what's going on, because that'll continually keep them engaged for the rest of the season, because they want to know what's in the box. As far as the individual episode is concerned, look at toward the end of the episode when Spike was asked to make all these nachos for everyone who was going to be learning as well, and then when they left in a huff, Spike was left with a whole bunch of nachos that no one's going to eat. So, of course, toward the end of the episode, as the Cutie Crusaders are leaving, which is assuming is the same day, you look outside and, hey, where are all the nachos? They're in the trash can outside. So little things like that. It's a lot of attention to detail and continuity, and I think that's what's really helping people stay engaged. At least it is for me.
It's a sad waste of good food, though.
Yeah. Speaking of continuity, I think we need to look at the other characters besides Twilight and besides the CMC. And first and foremost, I think that would be Diamond Tiara and Silver Spoon. Those two haven't been this involved in an episode since Ponyville Confidential. What did you think of their characters in this episode?
They really haven't changed much at all, which is kind of weird considering the little things that they've hinted at every now and again. The incident that happened with the Full Free Press, the incident with Babs, yet they're still not learning a lesson at all, so they're essentially still just the bullies that, we all know them for.
I think that's a really good point, because we get caught up on Chrysalis, we get caught up on Discord, we get caught up on these big villains, and we need to realize that if you go down to the CMC's level, to their world, that Diamond Tiara and Silver Spoon really are the antagonists. They're villain-ish. And for that reason, there really can't be that resolution to their characters. They can't just have new bullies show up all the time and keep resolving their character conflicts. That worked with Babs, that's pretty much what happened with Babs, but they can't do that every episode. So they need to keep them not learning a lesson, but in a way that's realistic.
It's also a good change of scenery for once. This time the world or all of the town they live in or something like that, the fate is not at stake. This time we're going to something way, way, way more simple, where the biggest problems to some people are just, the kids at school, dealing with popularity issues, bullies. It's a different change of scenery for once, We're not so much as at stake.
One of the biggest things as far as Diamond Tiara and Silver Spoon still being the bullies, the best way I want to reference them is they have to constantly stay bullies, and they have to not learn a lesson so that the Cutie Crusaders can constantly learn a lesson. It kind of goes to the reference of Bulk and Skull from the original Power Rangers, for those of you who remember that. They were there so that the Power Rangers, and they were in high school, could learn lessons about themselves and about having to deal with people around them. It's pretty much what it is. Even though they're not really villains, they're kind of just jerks and bullies on their own, they actually play a vital role toward the development of a character individually.
Kind of like what Discord did this season.
Well, you need them around so that you can tell those stories of the CMC's world, because those are the types of characters that inhabit that world. And that's always been a big thing about the CMC episodes, is it really has to take place from the Cutie Crusaders' point of view. And sometimes that's caused problems. There have been complaints that the songs are too simple, or that there were obvious solutions the characters didn't utilize, but that's part of their characters, is they don't know any better. They're young, they're naive, and that's really what happens in this episode. They basically create this problem for themselves. You can't fault the CMC for the situations they get themselves into, because how they get into the situation or dig themselves deeper, that's half the story. It's often a cautionary tale of how easy it is to get in over your head when you're out of your element or you think you're smarter than you actually are.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I think appeals to a lot of the younger viewers, and even to the parents, or brothers and sisters and uncles, nieces, and whatever. As far, family watching it with their younger siblings or kids, I think this kind of helps them get a perspective as well as what their kid might be going through, or their niece might be going through, or what have you.
And it's not just the CMC. Really, all of the kids are doing that in this episode. They all do the same thing. When Twilight kind of kicks everyone out of Twilight Time, the first thing that Diamond Tiara says to them is, well, look who's not in the princess's entourage anymore. Which they never were. That's a construct that the kids had created. And everything that they saw, they tried to fit into that schema. When Pip talks to Twilight outside the restaurant, he extrapolates from a single sentence, who is more popular than who. Oh, Twilight, Princess Twilight, only goes here because the CMC like going here. So that gives the CMC credibility. You see how that works? They're boiling everything down to that hierarchy. So everything has to be about who is more...
important.
Yeah, who is more important than who, yes.
Admittedly, when you were in grade school, and I speak out of experience, you kind of see that hierarchy develop on itself. It's because you're a popular kid, or you're friends with a popular kid, that, this is the cool thing to do, or this is the right thing to do, and it's just a hierarchy that kids make. Not necessarily the right type of thing they should be doing.
But that's what makes it such a good lesson, is that it's realistic. It's something that people that watch the show have done, will do, or will witness.
And will relate to.
Exactly. It's a cautionary tale of don't do this because. And I think that's what makes it such a good lesson for a CMC-focused episode.
I would have to agree about the hierarchy thing, especially when it comes to Sweetie Belle. She essentially wants to be at the top of that hierarchy, and when you get down to it, she's gone from the bottom, and she's been elevated all the way to the top because of her affiliation to Princess Twilight. So you can definitely see her going through that quasi-power trip because she's gone from a nobody and has become a somebody, and especially more so because her opinion is now valued because of her affiliation. And to her, that's somewhat of an identity-building type of thing. And all kids, and I can speak through experience, go through that thing. They go through that somewhat miniature identity crisis, wanting their opinion to be valued by their fellow peers, wanting to matter to others, and sometimes at any cost, and that's where it really hit home for me with this.
But Sweetie Belle's like that even with the rest of the CMC, and that's one of the things that, going back to this being Dave Polsky's first CMC episode, kinda made me wonder a bit. Apple Bloom, aside from working with apple seeds, really wasn't doing anything apple-related.
Well, actually, if you think about it, Apple Bloom, working with apple seeds.
I got you.
He's making apple seeds bloom.
Well, okay, so why was Scootaloo working with a unicycle instead of a scooter?
Scooter parts.
Unicycle parts.
But building things as well. Well, you have to also state that, Twilight Sparkle's name has nothing to do with her talent, per se. The word sparkle in Twilight. The names don't necessarily have to match what they do. Well, as for the Apple family, theirs kind of usually all have meanings, but I think the biggest thing that I was glad to see, though, in this episode was they actually gained a real skill and talent by the end of the episode. And Sweetie Belle can finally use magic. And I think that's a huge step in their pathway of learning. That's going to open a lot of doors for them, too.
Absolutely, and I love that that works into the lesson, but it's not exactly what the lesson is about. It's just that growth that you see and what they were able to accomplish when they stopped wondering how they could leverage Twilight's time to gain popularity and instead actually understood what Twilight was offering them and focused on making use of that.
I think this is what made this episode really great, is because not only are you seeing them learn a lesson themselves, they're actually learning a skill, so you're actually seeing them grow on multiple fronts. So seeing the CMCs actually, learn a lesson as far as, how to deal with others, to realize not to use their friends toward their advantage, and at the same time, they actually learn something to better themselves by. So I think that's what really, really did it, honestly, as far as the episode was concerned, for me anyway.
Well, it's about time for us to start wrapping things up, so Index, could you give us a summary of your thoughts on this episode?
Plenty of growth, good portrayal of the CMC. I think they learned their lesson and got some talents out of it. I don't think any of the time in the episode was actually wasted, so I rather enjoyed it.
Well, what I think really hit home for me with this episode is the fact that it reminded me a bit of grade school, the whole hierarchy, and if you're connected to somebody or you're whether you're popular or what have you or not, people seem to strive to be like you, to make the same decisions so they can revel in the same glory that you have for being, having that connection or what have you. It reminded me so much that individuality is what's really important here, not the fact to go with the group, not the fact that to go with what everyone's doing just because you have that connection. And even if you do know somebody or you are well connected to them, don't use them to your advantage, because that you do, they may not be as forgiving, like, for example, how Twilight was in this episode. And that, to me, the fact that she was forgiving was very humbling, like we've kind of mentioned so far, that Princess Twilight is humbling. It's just hits home to me. And I think that's why I really like this episode. The focus on individuality and the focus to do strive to be yourself, and don't use things to your advantage just because you can.
Again, I'm a little torn on this episode overall. It's Dave Polsky's first CMC episode, and I do think that some of their personalities didn't come through as strongly as they could have. The lesson in this episode was a perfect fit for the Cutie Crusaders. It was very down-to-earth, a slice-of-life episode, and it's perfect for the characters. I think the interactions of the kids, Diamond Tiara, Silver Spoon, the CMC, everybody was well put together and representative of how people that age probably would act in such a situation. I don't think there was necessarily a lot of growth in this episode. I think we saw the Cutie Crusaders do a lot of different things, but whether that has any bearing on the future of the characters definitely remains to be seen. Personally, I can see them not wanting to keep the characters stagnant, but you don't want them losing their identities in the process. Just like we see with Twilight being more princess-ish in this episode, but they still have her wipe her face off with a burger. It's a little strange seeing everyone so excited to see Twilight. I mean, she lives in the library. Go to the library, children. Just go to the library and you will see a princess. It's not that hard.
Well, reflecting on the growth part you said, I think the only significant thing really, at least from what I noticed, because I know this was a huge challenge and what people wanted to see happen with Sweetie Belle for a long time, was her ability to finally use magic. Kind of like, with Scootaloo, with we're still waiting to know if she'll ever learn how to fly. Those are two traits, that define those two different races, and seeing that Sweetie Belle finally got hers, I guess you could say activated, if it's a proper word or not, was a nice thing to see at least. It may not mean much, but it's a little thing.
And it's been established before that a unicorn's magic doesn't necessarily revolve around their special talent. So I guess it's just part of the characters growing up, so hopefully that's going to be reflected in some of their attitudes going forward. Overall, a great use of the CMC, a solid lesson, possible character building, and some great humor from poor Spike. A solid episode, but one I don't see myself rushing to rewatch anytime soon. Well, that about wraps it up for this week. Once again, my guests were IndexPony.
Alright, see you next time, guys.
And Kiniro.
Take it easy, guys. Hope to see you around soon.
And tune in next week for a review of Season 4, Episode 15, It Ain't Easy Being Breezies. This has been EFN Presents. Thanks for watching.